Welcome to the May 3rd, 2022 study session. We're going to start. We have several items on the agenda and our anticipating adjournment is 4:45 p.m. today. I'd like to go around first and just make certain that everyone speaks into the microphone, we can hear it, and introduce yourself. I'm Barbara Noseworthy, the mayor. I'll turn to Melissa.
Thanks for reminding us about speaking clearly. I'm hearing that we need to be more careful with that if we can as counselors. I'm Melissa Youssef, Mayor Pro Tem.
Jessica Buell, City Council.
Jose Madrigal, City Manager.
Olivier Mossmans, City Council.
Kim Baxter, City Council.
Thank you. And as we start this meeting, I would like to read a statement that's from me and only me. And I want to also acknowledge it does not represent individual views of council, but my own beliefs. So for thousands of years, this region was home to numerous people, bands, tribes, and nations. Each had their distinct culture, artistic expression, and community mores. In particular, this region was the ancestral home of the Nuche, the Ute bands, the Dene, the Navajo, Pueblo, Hopi, multiple Apache bands, and various other tribes and Latinx people who used and stewarded this land. I recognize that indigenous peoples were forcibly removed from their ancestral lands by the US government. It is important to recognize that the narrative of this region has mostly been told from the dominant perspective without recognition of those who came before us and who, to this day, continue to thrive, create, and connect with this land. Thank you for your respect in acknowledging this legacy. Let us start the meeting. City Manager, let's see. First item is new business, future new business and review of agendas. Does anyone have something to open with on new business ideas?
I do.
Okay.
There's been an email and some discussion about whether or not the city wanted to consider a fire ban. So I was wondering if that was something council wanted to talk about, given, I mean, I know it's cloudy outside right now, but given the situation or what might initiate a fire ban, that kind of thing.
I heard on the radio today that we were going into a fire ban starting at noon today. Did anyone else hear that?
I did not hear.
I thought that the county was calling a fire ban till 9
I know
o'clock.
there's some federal lands that went under a ban just for
Okay.
the last couple of days.
So who usually initiates it? County or fire department?
Well, the city can do our own.
Right.
The county does, but there are usually conditions around like what makes it be a class one. I can't even remember what they're called. Level one, level two.
Class red, a red, as I believe.
There's other.
Oh, the class one, it was yes.
Yeah, there's other ones too. So maybe it's a good idea for us to have a discussion, if only to refresh our memories of how it all works.
100%.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
And
And
then
then we're
we can-
heading into a very scary season ahead.
Yeah,
I'm glad you're bringing it up.
thank you. And then we can decide if we want to discuss having a fire ban once we're better informed. Yes, better educated. Yes.
And I think I remember that during the 416 fire, I mean, the fire ban was no smoking outside, no cigarettes, things like that. I mean, it was pretty specific. And I will say that I know I got a call 2 Fridays ago when it was pretty windy and there were some folks out in the park having a charcoal grill going.
Oh.
And so I think we need to educate the community, even if it's not in a ban, that with the winds. Okay, so there's support for that? All right.
The other one was, I forwarded it to you from Rachel from Habitat for Humanity. She wanted to do a presentation to council about what they're doing and what their vision of the future is concerning housing. And I wasn't certain if that was something that a presentation that should be made to council, or if that's a discussion with staff for them to incorporate into their planning, or how that might work.
How do our agendas look coming up? And
I think that there is some room, just depending on time frame for fire ban and her presentation. I'm not exactly sure how long it is. I do know staff has been in contact with her, Eva and Scott. Scott's actually out right now. Kevin, do you have any by chance information?
Eva's meeting with her tomorrow.
Oh, interesting.
Those ideas that she shared with council.
Okay.
Because obviously there's a number of pieces at play on that property that she's interested in. So we're trying to coordinate her thoughts with what else is going on and put a process together that's equitable for the community to evaluate the use of that property.
Maybe that's just
I was
the
gonna say, I
best
would
way
almost
to
say
go.
staff and then
Yeah.
you can do it in a housing update. She
If-
include it if it's applicable or invite her if it's applicable.
I think I agree.
But I would love to have that information included because of our priority on housing and the fact that Habitat for Humanity does really meet a very, they do a really good job in Durango of addressing housing. So I would love to someday get an update on the work that they're doing.
Yeah, well, those were the only two things I had.
I just want to follow up on that too. I think they wanted to propose something to the council, and given their track record, I really hope we can make that happen, allowing them the opportunity to present and what their thoughts are. They have a good success, long history, so.
I do have a question of, are we going into quasi judicial potential issues? Because whatever they may be proposing may have to go before the planning commission, issues like that. So I have concerns about getting them straight into council without going through the proper channels, both staff and planning commission, if that's required.
Dirk, could you advise on that?
Well, I think if they want to talk about specific projects, I think that would be a problem.
Right.
So I'm not sure what they're planning, but a general overview is probably not an issue, but specific projects would be an issue.
Staff and planning first and then.
Yeah, staff, yeah, and then it comes,
Okay.
I think so, yeah. Sounds good.
Okay.
Cool. Mayor?
Anyone else have,
I have two items. One is I wanted to correct and clarify a comment I had made during one of the recent meetings. And I think maybe now is the best time to do that. If that's good with everybody. That was my comment on the library, especially the increase in property taxes that I mentioned. We discussed the financials of the library and the option for a library district. And based on the recently completed feasibility study and the most recent financial numbers, the cost to operate the library was around 2.4 million in 2021. And that is currently financed through the joint sales tax from the city and county, which was around 3.5 million in 2021. And using the typical allocation that the city and the county apply, that seems to be more than adequate to finance the current operations, as well as potential extended services such as longer opening hours, as well as Sunday service. If a library district is formed, that would be financed through a new property tax for which new mill levy would be charged. So the cost for the library would no longer be paid for by residents and visitors, but only by property owners, meaning that locals would pay the full price and nothing is paid by the visitors. The feasibility study, and during that meeting, it was also confirmed that the cost to operate the library as a district would go up. The report was not quite clear on what was included, but it also did not account for the acquisition of the building and assets, just the district assuming the debt service requirements. So one could argue that the cost would be even higher if it included the purchase of the assets, depreciation, replacement, etc. Again, the report was not very clear. And most of the discussion has been centered on how the city and county would use the joint sales tax that would become available, since that tax would still be collected. Limited discussion on what makes sense financially or to consider the district, or how we can make sure the library is properly funded and has the appropriate level of service now and in the future. At this point, I still do not see the benefit of a district, and I had mentioned that if we proceed with a library district, and a district would be financed through additional property taxes, so a new mill levy, and based on the report provided, that the property taxes could be doubled. Now, the consultant clarified that the increase in property taxes would be closer to 10%. So I checked the reports, and I first need to clarify, the report is not very clear. During my initial review, based that comment on the property tax revenue, which was listed in the report as almost 3 million for 2021 for the city of Durango.
excuse me if I may? Excuse me. First of all, you were going to make a brief clarification. You've been chatting for several minutes and you're talking about an item that has not been agendized. And so I would like to stop this conversation. You're dialogue, your monologue, because this is not an issue that we are discussing, and it is starting to appear like you're trying to perhaps lobby the other counselors. I have a concern about that, and I would like to say that you've had sufficient time to address whatever it was you were, and now it's reaching a point that makes me concerned. Thank you.
Is
Do you
that
have a new
your-
business?
Is that your personal or is that the council?
I'm the chair of I actually chair this meeting.
Mhm.
So it is, I don't think I need to necessarily ask each counselor if they have the same opinion. If that would make you feel comfortable, I'm happy to do so. Do you have any concerns with going into an issue that has not been agendaized?
Well, my concern is that I agree with you. It does sound like you're stating your case again, that you stated at our last meeting, and that's not what's on the agenda. And if you state your case around the library and you advocate one way or another for it, which you are doing, then each one of us should have that opportunity. And it isn't as a discussion item on here, and the public doesn't know we're having that discussion. And so I actually would support the mayor's perception of it.
This is not up for consensus
I know,
decision.
I
So-
don't wanna like
Right.
argue or like pick sides or whatever. If you had like, I made an error, it is 10%, not 50%, I apologize. And now move on to what you want to the second item.
I'm not apologizing.
No,
I'm
we're gonna move
clarifying,
on.
But it's okay.
We're moving on.
I, as a speaker.
We're moving on.
Want to make a little statement on the correction.
You've made a statement and we are moving on.
Letting me off, and it's fine. You as a chair consider that correct, then that's the way it is.
Thank you. Does anyone else have an item for new business?
I have another one. We received a letter with a significant number of resident support, over 150 within 3 days, regarding the Mason Park property that included a straightforward question. This was a simple question. I believe we shouldn't be able to and willing to answer, even if only for transparency reasons and to show commitment to our community. So I'll ask the councilors the question, if any councilor has communicated with an architect, developer, builder, or investor regarding the development of housing at the Mason Park property, any point.
This is
Excuse me.
your new business.
If this
Obviously,
is-
no councilor is obligated to answer, but I would also.
I'm going to bring this up. We have received we have received support and advice from our city attorney. He has provided that advice. If you have questions about that advice, you are welcome to ask him that information. This is future new business. We are talking about the Mason Center today on the agenda. It may or may not be appropriate for the city attorney to address that issue. If you have future new business, please raise it. Does anyone else have future new business? Good. The review of the agenda for the May 17th. Does anyone have any comments on that? Right, thank you. Very good. Let's move now. Not yet. Let me see this agenda. So let me see, I've got the 17th in front of me, just a second. All right. Maintenance of the Animus River Trail. Tori.
What's
Okay.
wrong?
No, I just hate that it is bad. My back is in.
Well, see, therefore you should have said.
Sorry, you
No,
two.
you're
Madam Mayor, members of council, I'm here to talk about the Animus River Trail and maintenance around the Animus River Trail. I'd also like to introduce Sarah Humphreys. She is now our parks manager. She recently was promoted from our park supervisor position, so we're excited to have her in that role. But we're here to talk about some of the stuff that we're doing to maintain the Animus River Trail. If I can make this work. I'm going to first talk about a few capital projects that we're working on, then I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to talk about some of the daily ongoing operational things that her and her department work on, or division work on. We currently have two projects that are funded or through the CIP process. The first one is the Rank Park to Demon Bridge project. It's highlighted here in orange. The next one we have funded is the Santa Rita Park to County Road 210, highlighted here in yellow. There are also other two capital projects that are in the queue and being discussed by the Parks and Rec Advisory Board, Multimodal Board. They are Santa Rita to Albertsons section, and then the Demon Bridge to 29th Street section.
Albertsons, and which one? 29.
29th Demon Bridge up to 29th Street, where the river put in is there.
Like the high school bridge all the way up to the. Oh, okay, nice. And these aren't, you said, on the future projects list?
Yeah, so they haven't been recommended by the Parks and Rec Board or approved in a capital improvement project process through the budget process yet. They're still being talked about and ranked, so.
Okay.
Just to give you an update, the Rank Park to Demon Bridge, and the reason I bring up the capital projects regarding maintenance is these sections that I just identified are asphalt, and going from asphalt to concrete really does significantly help with maintenance costs. It reduces them. With asphalt, we get cracking and heaving a little bit more so than what we do with concrete. So I wanted to make you aware of these capital projects that will help us in the long term with maintenance. So the Rank Park to Demon Bridge, the contract has been awarded. What we're waiting on is a final recommendation, not necessarily a recommendation, but we're trying to obtain a permit through the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers because we have habitat disturbance with the New Mexican jumping mouse. We should hear that direction by May 24th. And at that point, we'll be able to move forward with the project. So the next project that we have is the Santa Rita Park to County Road 210. And sure.
On that last one, I'm sorry, is it okay?
Yes, please. And I had a question on it too, so go ahead.
Yeah.
On that rate project, that one that, the rate Stephen Bridge, you said you have an RFP. Are you finding, or maybe you aren't there yet in the process, if estimates are coming in higher than you had planned?
So this one is already under contract with JITA Construction. So we have a contract. It was awarded last year. We'll, once the process starts up again, once we get a ruling on the mouse, we'll be in contact with JITA, and I'm kind of curious to see if they're going to hold to their contract. So there is contingency. We always build contingency in our contracts, but I do know that a lot of the contracts that we're putting out there right now, or the RFPs we're putting out there, 150 to 200% above engineers' estimates. So, but this one is currently under contract.
Was that with a guaranteed maximum price?
Well, it's budgeted, I think, at $1.2 million, and that's where we're at with it right now. So
Thank you, John.
let's see where we go. The next one is Santa Rita Park to County Road 210. That was approved in last year's CIP process. We would have loved to have been out for design and put it out for bid. But we have been down a staff person, our landscape architect. We are having a heck of a time recruiting for a landscape architect. We've redesigned the job, and it's just was within the last week reposted. So we hope to have someone on board soon. Once we get that person onboarded, that's going to be one of their first projects, is to start that design work and get that out to bid for construction. That's going to be one that's going to be pretty interesting to see what the construction costs are for that. So any questions about that project?
How long the trail portion is that?
Oh, that's a great question. I should have had the lengths with me.
I was just wondering if it was similar to the one we were just looking at.
Yeah, it's a little bit longer. Yeah, I could get you the information and trail section links.
But maybe close.
Pretty close, yeah.
Go ahead.
I have a little question on that, maybe some background information. With, that we have significant growth in Tree Springs and then near Home Depot, and all these people are gonna have better access with the trail that's being built there, and they wanna commute into the downtown. They're gonna cross that bridge, and then they're gonna go along Santa Rita Park and then to the Doubletree to get into the downtown area. And has there ever been a discussion that you know of to connect this bridge on the east side of the river straight north to first crossing Santa Rita Drive. I know it's not part of this project. I was just wondering some background information because we're gonna have the same problem as everybody that lives up north of downtown connecting into the downtown area. And since you have that project listed there, Santa Rita to Country Road 210, that would be a natural extension to go straight to the left, basically.
Straight up here.
Now, left on your map to the
Oh,
left.
over this way.
And then crossing that, for example, the bridge.
Yeah.
Has there been any discussion? And I know it was before your time. but-
I would have to look into whether there's been previous discussion on that. I am not aware of that, so. There has been. Thank you, Kevin.
Trail plan years ago envisioned pretty much what you just talked about. We have the horse coach trailhead set up for the trail to come through there, so the tie would be line trail to college. But, you know, it's a ways off in terms of, I don't know where it's in the CIT process, but it was in the previous trail plan. I'm not sure if it's in the today or not. It was envisioned.
It would be a pity to miss that connection again for people that everybody south being able to go straight into downtown.
I believe that property is CDOT property. In that square, because we looked at it as a homeless location at one point.
Right along here. CDOT.
So my question, if you go back to the picture, that was, no, there we go, thank you. So I know I mentioned to you that a community member had said this connection of the bridge was degrading significantly and there were huge differences. And I think you mentioned to me in an email today that that had been repaired at the end of April.
Yes, April, yeah, end of April.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that everybody knows that that had been taken care of because it was kind of a.
May I
dangerous
ask
spot.
both sides of the bridge? Because I ride that and I had to figure out which way I could get up without.
So we did a cold patch on it on the 26th, I believe. That is the correct date. And it's temporary. We need to come up with a better solution, but it's safe and it's, you know, it's feathered out, so we'll be rained up. So it's not that really abrupt edge, especially on the south side of that bridge.
Excellent,
Yeah,
thank you.
the east side, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So the Santa Rita Park to Albertsons is one that is under discussion right now. We are working with our Parks and Rec Board to go through priority rankings, and we just were able to start establishing some of those rankings. This actually is our #1 highest priority project. So we'll be refining that priority list, but that's what it's standing at right now. So.
Excellent, that's a tough spot. It gets a lot of use too.
Yep.
It really does.
And then the last section is Demon Bridge to 29th Street. And I think that one came in ranked at right around 11th or 12th right now. So that'll probably be a couple of future years out. So, but those are the capital projects that are either funded or looking to be funded in the future. Yes.
Turi, we've received some emails from folks about including into the cost landscaping along when you're upgrading or maintaining, addressing that. Is there been any additional discussion on the Parks and Rec Advisory Board with that or any other thinking among staff?
We haven't had any discussion with Parks and Rec Advisory Board on that, but since those comments have recently come in, we can definitely interject some of those comments and have some discussion around that. Right now, our estimates, we hadn't been looking at that, but it's something we could look at in the future.
Is it a way that you could combine the goal of tree planting and spending $50,000 a year on trees? Could you incorporate that into the maintenance and upgrade design to plant trees along?
Yeah, there's
some places.
definitely a possibility. One of the other capital projects that is being considered is to update our community forestry plan, do a current inventory of where we're at, and this time including an analysis of our canopy. Once we get some of that analysis, then we could take a look at where it would be appropriate to plant trees, and we can then definitely start incorporating some of that into our projects. So.
Other questions for Tori?
Yeah, what's the last, what is our last forestry plan?
So it was updated in 2019. It was done in-house. In the last inventory where people were sent out to actually inventory, I think was about 12 years ago, 10, 12 years ago. So this will be an opportunity for us to re-inventory and see where our trees are at health-wise. I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, who's just going to quickly talk about some of the ongoing maintenance.
So we do vegetation management along the trail corridor. It's a very specialized piece of machinery. I've had trouble filling that position. I have begged the previous operator to come back, and he agreed to come back to help us with that for this season. So that's going to be helpful. We're hoping to start next week on the corridor south of the Humane Society that had some closures for an LPA project. And so it did not get trimmed the last few years. So it needs some attention. We do power sweeping as needed. Ideally, it would be on a monthly rotation. Again, staffing issues. So I keep an eye on it. And when it's starting to get pretty gritty, or if I'm getting feedback, then we'll send somebody out for early morning sweeping. That's an early morning operation so that we're not interfering with the commuters for the most part. The trail light checks and maintenance, our goal would be to do it at least monthly. Again, it takes a staff person out of service for almost an entire day because they come in and start checking lights. Any questions? Okay. So we did put some money in the budget this year for repainting the striping on the ART for safety reasons. I will reach out to some different contractors. We've historically used A&B lines in the past, but I will do some due diligence to make sure there's not a new contractor available. So there's $5,000 budgeted for that. We did a project in 2017 where we addressed small sections of railing. And I still have some leftover product that I need to use up this season. So I would like to do some of the repainting in-house if I can with staff. Hopefully the staff will come. And then we have $10,000 budgeted to address additional railing painting. And then $5,000 for repair of the asphalt patching. I think it's a good opportunity to see which sections are going to get replaced. The photo in the slide is actually probably the #1 priority for this year, to feather that asphalt into the concrete section so that we don't have that heave. It's painted and signed, but it's definitely, it's abrupt, even though it's been peeled back. And then addressing just some of the cracked areas. I don't think we want to do something that's up for replacement, but there's definitely some sections that sound like they're going to stay. So using the remainder of that budget in those sections that we intend to push into the future. That's it for me.
Yep.
Great. Any other questions? Thank you.
I was just gonna thank Sarah again for
Mhm.
your help with that resident on the.
Oh, Stephanie,
Yeah,
she was lovely. Yeah, that was my pleasure.
it's really nice. Sounds like they were very happy.
She was just one of those people you connect with. There's just some of those folks that you work with out in the community and you just have a really quick connection. And she was lovely. And it was really nice of her to write that letter.
That's really nice.
Very
Yes,
good.
nice to see.
Thank you all
Good.
for acknowledging that. That was
Great.
nice.
Counselor, I realized that I needed to bring an item up under future new business or a need to have a special meeting. If you'll indulge me for 5 minutes, may I go back to that rather, or I can wait till the end of the city council meeting and do it then. So thank you. This week, last week and this week, we met, council members met to look at the boards and commission applicants. And then on Monday, 3 of us met to actually make those appointments, and those appointments went out. And then today I learned that there is one more position that needs to be filled, and that we actually had people interested in that position, and that we'd actually discussed possibilities. So what I'd like to suggest is that we need a special meeting, ideally this week, for about possibly 15 minutes to discuss the one vacancy and possible solution. And so I think that can achieve the matter, but I need to get a sense if there's council consensus for going forward with scheduling that meeting.
Mayor, I sent you a text, but you apparently didn't get a chance to look at it. It was just before this meeting. I mentioned this issue to Faye, and actually I thought she had a good idea as a possibility, because this really isn't new business. It's an extension of existing business that happened yesterday. Faye's suggestion, and I concur, is that you consider amending the agenda for the meeting tonight. to add
Oh,
an
very good.
item, To do that, and again, the normal process is you wouldn't add brand new business that way, but this is an extension of existing business. So I thought Faye's idea was good and will work. So if you, that's an option I'll throw out on the table.
I might even refer to it as an elegant solution.
Yes.
Is there support? I'll bring it up. You don't need to do it now. I'll bring it up in tonight's meeting. If there's support to address that under existing business. And if not, then we'll find a way to address it later in the meeting.
And if I may, I sent out an email earlier today with the voting appointments so that you could look at it, we could look at it and talk about that exact same thing. So in between meetings, you could refresh your memory. Familiarize yourself with that.
Thank you. Very good option. Thank you. And thank you. I'm sorry I didn't see that text. I was catching up.
Sure.
Okay, so next item. Community survey discussion. This will be,
Mayor and council, if it, we're going to go ahead and pull that item. We had talked about the survey. I met with Tom, and there might be some other options we want to consider. So rather than trying to kind of rush to a community survey, it's more important that we get it correct and have something that we can benchmark in another 2 years. So we're going to take a pause on that and pull that and then come back with it at a later time when it's right.
great.
If I may, I just had one question that a community member asked me to have considered for the survey, which is, do you feel that your board commission service is effective, that your voice has been heard and valued and considered both for board members and for those of the community? If they felt that. So that was just a question to be considered.
Great. The next item on the agenda is discussion regarding possible ballot measure regarding lodger's tax and use of taxes. And I believe the city attorney will start us off on that discussion.
Yes, thank you. This is an item that council was made aware of last year when the Tabor election was held last April to increase the lodger's tax from 2% to 5.25%. Tabor requires that estimates be made about the amount of tax, new tax to be raised. Again, for the partial year 21, an estimate of $600,000 was made and was added to the ballot question. Excuse me, $900,000. I'm sorry, it's $900,000 in new tax for the increase. Then, as part of the Tabor notice for the first full year of the increase, an estimate was made to raise $2 million. The estimates were made at that time based on the best information that staff had in consultation with bond counsel. Obviously, in 2020 hindsight, those numbers, particularly the one for 21, was too low. But please keep in mind that those estimates were being made about the first of the year. So it was very uncertain as to what would happen in terms of the rebound in tourism when many of the COVID restrictions were removed. So we had a banner year in 21. The amount raised is going to significantly the amount that was raised will significantly exceed that estimate. The current estimate of what may be raised from the 22 increase is probably going to be very close to the $2 million that was also included in the Tabor question for the first full year of the tax in 22. So Tabor requires that we go back to we have a couple of choices. One would be to refund the tax that was collected in excess of the estimate. Or the other choice would be to seek voter approval to retain and expend the funds in excess of those estimates, both for 21 and 22. Tabor states that the refund has to be made in the year following the collection, or that voter approval be sought in that year period. So currently, the only time that we could ask voters to retain the 21 tax would be in November of this year. And then, of course, 22 tax actually could be done in 23, but the suggestion from staff and from D. Weiser at Bond Council is that assuming that we want to ask the voters to retain these amounts, that we ask for both years and not have to ask 2 questions. So one other wrinkle in Tabor that I want to make sure that I put on the table is that it's not just the penalty of a possible refund. It's also a penalty was built into Tabor to reduce future collections by the proportionate amount of the over collection. So it's really pretty imperative that I think council consider taking this to the voters because it could significantly impact the amount that could be collected in the future. Both, again, for the overage of 21 and for 22. So again, the question would be, in terms of just this question, would be relatively simple. It would simply say, shall the city be entitled to retain and expend all funds raised from the lodger's tax during 21 and 22, including any amounts that were in excess of the estimates, sort of paraphrasing what a ballot question would look like in that regard. Again, that could be put on the ballot November of this year. That would be a coordinated election because that would be the normal general election at that point.
May I ask a clarifying question and then open it up to council? So my understanding, there was a 2-part discussion, and maybe we're only doing one today. We were discussing these specific issues, but we had also discussed as a council seeking a study session to actually explore a reconsideration of the allocation of the percentages. We had talked about not everyone necessarily being at the table. We had mentioned potential examples of workforce housing. I want to get a sense before we open up for discussion here. Is that discussion on your agenda at some time forthcoming?
It is right now
Yeah,
for this part of this item. We're just focusing first on the Tabor
Okay.
portion. I'm sorry, Greg, for talking
That's
for you, but
right.
Yeah.
I think this is,
Yeah.
we're focusing on the Tabor side because they kind of enrolled together. The other side of it was also to discuss if there was a will with the council to entertain changing those percentages. And if so, it kind of dovetailed with if we're having an election
Right.
in November, do we do that also in November? Or is this something that maybe waits in April just so that staff can begin getting some direction to get a timeline put together?
Thank you. I was trying to get a sense of that because I felt that maybe addressing your questions that you presented first, maybe a different order might be better if we had the conversation about the allocation. So I just wanted to
Yeah, and
pose that.
I prepared the agenda doc just for the purposes of the Tabor question because I think the other question is less legal. It's more, operational and policy. So I agree. I think the idea was to discuss both. I think I will toss out the idea that if you're going to ask the Tabor question to keep the money and then ask a separate question whether you change the allocation, I think in my mind those are 2 separate questions, and a person might, for instance, want to vote to retain the funds but not vote on a new allocation. So I think it's possible perhaps if it were done in a way that was perfectly clear, it might be included in one question. But then again, I think you're depriving the ability of people to make independent
Mhm.
decisions on the 2 things.
Okay, so now I'll open up.
I assume that they would be 2 separate questions if that's something the council wanted to do.
Okay, so I'll open it up for discussion on council.
So assuming it's 2 separate questions, what's our timeline for getting it on the ballot in November? And you don't have to answer that right now, but do we have the time to do that?
Yes, we do. And that's why we're bringing it up now because we're still a number of months out. But Faye, I know you've spoken to the county clerk about, I think there's a notice due in June sometime.
We would have to let the county know no later than July 15th if we want to be part of the November election. And then we would have to have the ballot language to them by September 2nd. So that leaves a very tight window. And it's like, 6 weeks there in between.
Okay, right, so, and that would be on both questions.
Yes.
Okay, so then one of the other questions I had before we discuss the whole concept here is on the Tabor one, where we're asking to retain the money, would it be best for us to be specific about what we were going to use it for? Or is it just general
I think
fund
this-
dollars, or how does that work?
Well, I think the assumption would be that whatever you collect and expend would still be subject to the same limitations that are that was in the current ballot language. So it wouldn't change how you spend it. it would just be allocated, it would be retained and expended. And we could be clear about that in the ballot language, that it would be for the purposes as,
Yeah, I think we should.
as previously approved, or again, you could list them all out again.
Right, and so if you did that and everyone agreed to that, then the other question would be, do we want to reallocate the percentages? Would that then also apply to that, to the dollars?
It
that were on
could,
the table
it could, I
question?
think, I think you could make it that. It would, again, I would suggest maybe you make it effective. Well, I think, yes, I think the answer is you could. You would want to pick an effective date, probably, that you would want to do that. So November election, you might want to make it effective at the beginning of the year 23. But yes, I think you could do that.
You could go to the table.
Uh-huh,
Okay, all right.
yeah.
Thank
Because
you.
the
I just
change-
wanted, I was just trying to get the red tape in mind.
Yeah, that was my
Right.
only question. Is it spent the same breakdown as? what we voted on?
Until it's changed, I think it would be subject to the same allocations. That's right.
You couldn't just take it and put it all towards housing or something.
You could put that in the question.
That could be in the
Put that
question.
Yeah, you could put that in the question.
Like all the overage goes to housing or transportation or.
I think so. And again, I asterisk that I would want to speak to Dee. I've had some general conversations with Dee about this early on. I emailed him earlier this week about just to let him know we were talking about this. But I do think that you could, for instance, on a one-time basis, say we're going to allocate all this to a particular use, and then moving forward, here's how we will allocate it from here on out. I think that's possible, but I'd like to talk to Dee about that.
Okay. Could I share with council? I sent an email and Cynthia asking a question, and I did want to make certain you all had this information. It just came in. Cynthia made, but also for the public, I think it's important. I had asked how much had been provided to visit Durango or to our contractor to deal with the Welcome Center and marketing of the city, and then how much had the county paid for 2019, 2020, and 2021. And then I asked for the projection for 2022, 2023. So I want you to get a sense of the real dollars rather than just the percentage. So in 2019, the city payments were $725,576. The county payments were $448,275. In 2020, that went up to $754,602, and the county payments were $573,918. In 2021, the city's payments were $629,607, and the county payments, and I believe these may be estimates still, were $924,415. So you're up to about 1.5 million now. Projected for 2022 is $1,288,235 from the city. And right now it's at $550,000 from the county. We don't know what they'll do with their lodger's tax option. 2023, our projection for payments to the marketing or under this current rule would be $2,073,271. And 2024, that estimate is $2,114,736. So I wanted council to have those numbers as, rather than thinking just in terms of percentages, what do we need to accomplish with marketing the city and how much is appropriate to spend toward that objective. So I put that out as well.
So I believe that we had kind of anticipated 1.2 being what we would be contributing, which is what we did in 2022. Toward that, I think, is that the total that we talked about, and then the percentages worked off of that? I don't remember.
The 2022 is 1.2 million
Well, that's what we actually contributed,
in 2022.
right? But when we did the ballot measure, I think that we estimated an amount in total collection for the, and then how the percentages would apply to it. And I don't remember if we, because it seems like I thought we were estimating about $1 million going to visit Durango, but I don't.
I can't comment. That would be a question for Cynthia. Again, the estimate for the increase in 2022 was $2 million.
So the increase, and that is the overage.
That's the
Just to
increase
confirm.
from the new tax, right? So again, the projection is that the collections in 2022 for the increase will be pretty close. I mean, it's early, it's too early to tell how
Right.
good a season we're gonna have and so
Right.
forth, but the early estimates are that we're on track to be about that $2 million increase.
So I guess what the question for me is, what was our original estimate when we did the ballot measure of what we would collect the first year?
900,000
900,000.
for the increase, but that's not the total.
No, the total tax. And
I
then,
don't-
and then we applied the percentages to that total tax to
Yes,
allocate.
that's right. Yes.
So if we knew what we thought that was going to be, because that was where we were coming from, was here's what we think is going to happen. And if it's doubled, then I think we need to know what we thought was going to happen, not just what actually happened.
Yeah, those would be numbers for finance. I may
Yeah.
have numbers, but again, my involvement was primarily for the increase. But
And I know you're going to need to find
I
that.
have a whole file.
Yeah. May I turn to, Melissa had a question as well.
This is a follow-up to the mayor's question on if we have this as a study session, Jose. Because I guess what I'm trying to understand is, and also timing wise, if we were to have ballot language to voters by September 1 for a potential if there was discussion around reappropriating the funds, do we have time for a public process and community engagement on that? Is a question I'd just like to throw out for discussion. And if so, what might that look like? We've already had a ballot measure. It passed. It was, but it was a narrow margin, but it did pass. But I just want to bring that to the table because as we sit here talking about the possibility of it, I really think we have to have some community involvement in that.
Yeah, absolutely. On the public participation side, I think that the window is pretty close. If we look at it, we're May 3rd now. Would you say we have to get to the county July 30th? to let
July
them-
15.
July 15th,
They prefer by the 15th.
the 15th.
Drop dead as the
Let's just
30th.
notice that we're going to put something on the ballot. We don't have to be specific.
Exactly. Yeah, the ballot language wouldn't have to be certified till
So I mean,
September
if
2nd.
you're looking
Ballot language by 9/1.
9/1, but even if you're looking to the county, well, does it have to be, I'm gonna ask a follow-up question. Does it have to be specific in 2 different areas or just that we're having
Just that we're having it, that we want to be part of the
so
election.
then the ballot language is September 1.
Yeah, September 2nd, actually,
Okay,
yeah.
September 2nd. So makes it a little easier because seems
Gives us a
that
little.
we're going to have an election if we're going to do the 2021 overage on the Tabor. So that seems to be a foregone conclusion, I think. Hopefully I'm not speaking too far for the council, but it seems that that's what we need to do. So then you would look at by September 1, you'd have ballot language, which I would probably say that the council would need to come probably, Dirk, to a discussion or a decision that they want to go through probably by late July. So that it gives you at
Well-
least a month to do the ballot language to be ready to present.
No, I
September.
think it could be a little later than that because we have to certify the ballot language. So I would say move back 2 weeks from the September date. So by the first meeting in August, that would be a good time, I think, to try to have that nailed down. So you're looking at, May, June, July, August. So it's for 3.5, 4 months out.
But I think when you look at that on the public participation side, that gives us May, June, and maybe a little bit of July, because I'm sure that the council would want to come back and see what those results are on that. It would be very tight, I think, to do a public outreach campaign, if that's where the council wanted to go on getting that feedback.
But not impossible.
Not impossible, but it'd be tight.
The only reason why I think it's important to do some sort of community engagement is we're already receiving emails. We received the email from Tim Walsworth and from Frank Lockwood about overages to a feasibility. And we each heard from the DACE representatives about, overages and or portions going to the Performing Arts Center. Also, we all know that council's priority has been and continues to be housing. And we also have a need for transportation. So there's all these
Public safety.
public safety. So there's just these issues that I would be interested in kind of re-engaging with the community a little bit on it if we're going to another election. And sorry to cut you off.
No, you didn't cut me off. You were going.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
go.
No,
Go
I
ahead.
100
Okay.
I was
Go
just
ahead.
gonna say I 100% agree. I wasn't on council when this went through, but we were campaigning and it was kind of a big to-do. And in my recollection, it was the first time that the lodging community, the arts and culture, that everyone got on board and actually supported the increase, which was way overdue. Our lodgers tax increase. When I was running, I was trying to look for it now and I can't find it, but I looked at how much Santa Fe spends on marketing, how much And there was like 5 communities that I had looked up, and we actually spent less.
Yeah.
Then, I don't know now, I'd have to go and look now. We spent less on marketing than those communities, significantly less than Santa Fe, I remember seeing. But there was other communities we were also like size-ish sort of communities, we were less than. I know it passed by a narrow margin, but it did pass. And so if we're not gonna have public engagement, I would support going out for election to spend it as it says in the ballot language already. If we can go out and get community support for housing or a conference center or like whatever it is, and see that there is community support for it, then I would be on board. But I don't know if you or Tom or who, if you guys think you can do it.
Can I ask a clarifying question of Dirk? Dirk, you're presenting this as one package. Is it possible to split the packages so that you might have the answer to the over collection in one ballot and the possible reappropriation in a second ballot?
Well,
On a different time, at a
Yes,
different
absolutely.
election.
The only time critical item really is the 21 over collection.
Yeah.
So the rest, yes, so you could change the other allocation at any time.
Okay, so that's also something that I was thinking about too, that you brought it to my mind, is that can we see how, I mean, Visit Durango has changed their marketing strategy. They're focusing more on sustainable tourism. Can we see if this marketing money is bringing, like, can we see if it's working? If it's bringing people here in the shoulder seasons, if they're more, responsible tourists, if this is working, why would we not as a council support it? We can't know if it's working if like it's less than a year that it's been going and we're like, nope, you can't change it right now. I just feel like time. I don't know.
It is
I'm open to-
interesting that you brought that up, because I had thought about the same thing. The other advantage of if we did one at a time.
Yeah.
And just did the overage in November of 2022, is that it may speak to continued community support.
Yeah.
For that, present, it's just a thought.
Or you might hear more opposition to what are you doing to continue marketing. I think what I'd like to say is I recognize the vote and that it passed. And as the one person who supported the lodger's tax but did not support the allocation, I think that it's important to recognize that there may be some newer circumstances with the housing inventory crush, and that I don't have a position right now. I just know that we have an opportunity. We have an opportunity when we're bringing this before the public. So I'm looking to the council to get a sense of, do we discuss this opportunity? Where do we go with that?
So I'm kind of hearing that there's, I'm hearing definitely that we need to do this overage in November.
I think that's critical, yes. I do.
So the question for me becomes, do we put it on the ballot as continuing the percentage allocations that we already have? Or do we request something different for that overage? Whether it be transportation, workforce housing, or half of it goes to that, the rest of it's on the same percentage. And to your point, that I think that it would help us indicate to us how the public feels if they say, yes, put it into transportation and workforce housing. We love that idea. That might help us with the future question. And then the question too is, what if they, no matter what we say about the Tabor thing, what if they say, no, you don't get to keep it? Then what do we do?
Well, then we'll be looking for a solution, probably to figure out a way to do a refund of some sort, and it would, I think
That's nasty.
that would be a very difficult thing to arrange, simply because it's paid by individuals who stay a few nights in Durango, move on. It would be impossible to try to actually do a refund. So there's very little guidance about what we would do. We have to confer with Dee and try to come up with a plan.
When
So-
Tabor visualizes that refund, does the cost of doing that refund get to be paid for out of the increase? So it all has to come off the top for the
Yes.
city. Well, I think we need to make that really clear.
And that refund would go to the visitors. It would be
Everyone
go-
got it. Everyone who paid it.
Theoretically, the refund, and I don't think that the drafters of Tabor thought about a tax like this. I think they were thinking about a property tax increase where you would be able to identify who paid it. But I think anything like a sales tax or any kind of a dispersed tax like that is almost impossible to determine a refund. Again, The only concern I would have about attaching a specific payment to a retention is you might have somebody who say, I'm fine with you retaining it, but I don't want you spending it for that purpose. And that's just.
Well, you could do three.
I was gonna say, can you have multiple questions? Not that I
Yes.
would support that. So you can say, can we retain it and spend it like the ballot language says?
Yes.
Yes or no? Can we retain it and spend it just on housing and transportation? Can we retain it and spend it on, like, can you have an art center? Can you have 3 or whatever, have 10?
I think to the extent that the questions are mutually exclusive, because if you say, can we keep it and expend it for the purposes in the original ballot language, you have a separate question that says, I think what you have to do is phrase it so that that question stands alone. In other words, we can keep it no matter what, and it's allocated to the existing purposes. You could have another question that says, shall we then consider taking the overage and spending it for part of it for another purpose? I think once you've crossed, because if that one is approved, then it sort of voids out part of the first one, if that
Well,
makes sense.
so why not have a vote for one, just like you do with candidates? And they say exactly the same thing, retain the dollars except for what the dollars are spent on, and then you vote for one. So you either vote to retain it at the same percentage, or you vote to retain it for housing and transportation, or you vote not to
refund it.
Yes.
Because of the yes, no nature of a Tabor question, I would have to speak with Dee about whether or not we could do that. I don't know the answer to that. But I think the problem is that we have a yes, no ballot. You obviously you have questions where you have multiple candidates for, one position or two positions, and you vote that way and they accumulate. So I'm not going to say it's not possible. I frankly haven't thought about that and I haven't seen that. No. But,
Something to figure out.
That
we
would
can-
give us good insight too, as
Yes.
to what people want to spend
So I was thinking,
the larger size.
it's interesting to me that it's Dee Weiser, correct?
Yes, Dee.
Is suggesting that we do both 2021 and 2022 at the same time.
Yeah.
There's a part of me that was thinking it would be easier just to focus on the 2021 and give us more time to address the much larger 2022 once we kind of hear from the community.
Right.
And
I-
or have a time for a more robust community-wide conversation.
Right. I think the idea was simply avoidance of having more than one election. So I think if council wants to, both from a cost standpoint and from the standpoint of just having the election. So, obviously we would also have an option for an election in April of
Right.
23 as well, because that's your regular election date. I think the Tabor aspect of this and what I was focusing on in my agenda doc is really the Tabor retention of the money issue. The change in the allocation is not really a Tabor question.
Right.
So
Right.
it's a little bit, once you have the funds, then, we are amending the question that was approved, but that's, I don't really think that that's as much of a Tabor question as the dollars and cents are.
I'd like
So
to build, I'd like to build on Melissa's suggestion there, a question. So I just want to be certain. If council only went forward with asking for the current funds that have exceeded the amount that we listed, and then you got that information back of what they supported, then if I was hearing her correctly, would it be possible to then in, say, April of 2023, have an election that could include two parts, the use of the collection that was more, and possibly a reappropriation of the percentages? So that would give you the information, instead of making a decision for a $2 million pot of money or whatever it is, you're making a decision on a $900,000 pot of money
No,
and then having that to work on later. I wanted to clarify that.
I think the answer to that question is definitely yes, you could do it that way. Again, the only thing that is currently, causes us a problem is the over collection
Mhm.
or the collection over the estimate in 21.
So that has
So
to go.
that has to
That has to
go.
go.
That has to go simply because there's really no other clear choice to avoid having, it impact future revenues under what's already been approved because of the Tabor language to reduce it proportionally and to figure out how you do a refund. So that question, so yes, the answer is that's the big question and that's the hot topic. You could put a ballot question on 23, that, and you could argue that that makes more sense to wait, because then you will know what the number is, the amount. And it's possible, depending on what the collections are, that you won't have an overage in 22. We just won't know that until the year is over.
It's true.
So, and tie that with the second question of changing the allocation.
So going to the 21 collections and this table question for 21. So if we said, shall the city retain those dollars? And that was approved or not approved, depending on the situation. Then you could ask two questions that aren't table questions. So they could be connected in that way of choose one or whatever, because they wouldn't be table questions. That's the table question.
Right.
Shall the city retain it? The second one is, shall the city spend it in this way? And then is it original allocation or is it a new allocation? And you could,
I think that's possible. I've made notes. I'll just have to think and I'll talk.
yeah, because I think that way you get the question answered that you're concerned about, and we're not muddying the waters. Just get a straight question answered. And then essentially, how is it?
I think you'd have to be careful that if you had a negative vote on the other two, you want to make it clear it doesn't impact the question of retention and expenditure under the existing allocations. But then on top of that, you could ask the other question.
That's why I said, if
A or B.
if one passes, then blah, blah, blah.
And do you not have to put in, can you avoid putting in refund to the language? Because, or if you have to mention a refund, can you make it clear that it is not going to the folks here, it's going to the people who paid the lodger's tax?
Yeah, I don't think we would be required to put the refund language
As an
in our
option.
question.
Okay.
But again, I'll need to talk to you about that. He has handled some of these questions where there has been an over collection, and he didn't mention, first of all, he said all of them passed in other places in the state, but he didn't mention the requirement to put in the refund language, and I don't think it would be necessary. I think the question is, can we keep it and spend it?
I have a question,
Good, Olivia.
maybe more for finance. The over collected amount, is that sitting in a reserve? Refresh my memory, I can't remember this. Is it sitting in a reserve, or have we already spent it or budgeted to be spent in 2022?
We've absolutely not spent it. It is from the accounting perspective, it is sitting in a deferred revenue account, liability account, just waiting until there's some resolution to this.
And that applies to the 22 budget as well, the forecast.
It was, I believe it was included in the 22 budget.
Because we don't have the 22 numbers, so we wouldn't know what to do.
The forecast, the budget that we just passed. Then there in the documents it's already clarified. I just had to reread, it, but all the penalties and overages apply to the over collection of the 3.25%.
That's right.
To the
It just applies to the increase in the amount. That's right. And while we were talking, by the way, I don't want to add confusion here, but to get back to the numbers, and I'll tell you what I did here. We estimated the total collections for 21, the increased collections from the 3.25 in 21 to be $900,000. So that was for 7 months. So that means that we would have estimated a collection of 128,000 per month for 7 months. You extrapolate that out to a full year, that would have meant the new amount would have collected about $1.5 million, round numbers. So working backwards from that, the 2% for all year would have been, read my writing here. So, yeah, so 128,000 per month, which would be 1.5 for the new amount. So that's $472 per 1 cent. So that times the 2 existing cents would put you at about $940,000 for the whole year for the 2%. Because again, it's a longer collection time. So the two together appears to me was estimated both the existing 2% for the full year and the new 3.25 for 7 months is about 1.8.
maybe.
And I think that's what you said.
Excuse me, I was following that. I'm sorry. I thought you said, excuse me, just, I thought you said the new 3.5%, we got basically 1.5 million. One point, you said 900 for 7 months, but if you extrapolate it I'm
If
just,
you extrapolate for the whole year, we would have estimated a million.
so I'm just trying to get a yearly amount that we can predict. So you said it would be roughly 1,500,000. And then under the previous 2%, that was 940,000 for a year,
That would be
the amount.
using this, right, using that same percentage, that would be.
So with the 940 and the 1.5 million, wouldn't that be 2.4 million?
No, because the 1.5 would have been all year, so we only collected 9.
Right, but I'm just saying going forward, I just want to have apples to apples. So if we're collecting 1.5 million extrapolated for a year on the new tax, and we're probably collecting 940,000 on the old tax for the year, then we're actually looking at 2.4 million plus
Well,
being available to be used for marketing.
right, and the reason I did it, this would have been the estimated amount that we were estimating for 21. The actual collections are significantly higher than that
Mhm.
by about 60%. I
Yeah,
think that's about right, right?
Melissa, yeah, I'm done. Thank you. I just wanted to clarify his numbers.
Right, so what the number I was getting at was what we were estimating the total collections to be under the 5.25 for 21.
Okay,
Again, the problem arises because the actual collections were significantly higher than that.
and I was looking at the next year, so perfect, thank you.
Right, so just again, round numbers, if we were expecting it to be 1.8, I think the actual collections were almost 60% over that. If you take the 600,000 as compared to the 900,000, then the actual collections, and I'll defer to, I'm not the finance expert here, but I was just trying to toss out some round numbers. It's significantly higher.
Melissa, you had a question.
Oh, I was just gonna maybe throw out an idea for consideration, just, we're all kind of
This is
pondering
brainstorm.
thoughts. It seems like, for me, when you're going to the voters, you want to keep it simple. So one thing we've learned is keep it very simple. And we have to go to the voters for 2021. Or 2020, well, the overages for 2021. I still am a little bit confused as to why Dee was really wanting to combine them both. I'm not necessarily confused, but I'm slightly conflicted because I actually see going to the voters as an opportunity for the voters to speak. And
Sure.
like, I'm not really afraid to go to the voters twice. Like it's an opportunity to hear their voice. And
I think it was simply trying to, no easier way to say it than to kill two birds with one stone here, just to say we'll cover both of those things. I don't think he necessarily was discouraging two questions. I think he was just assuming that it would be an opportunity to clear up all of the issues in one action.
right. Which takes, if you were to do that, time, education of the community,
Cost of the
engagement
election.
of the community, and a lot of it takes some time to get there. If you're
And
gonna do it
there is
all
a
in one
cost to
question.
do two elections, although you're going to be doing an April election.
Right.
Right,
And so I guess what I'm thinking of is if we could for November deal with just keep it very simple, just the overages for, just as an idea for consideration, the overages for 2021, and maybe even consider keeping it as is, as the voters approved for 2021. And then we engage in a more robust community-wide process to gather feedback while we have a little bit more time. And we give ourselves a few more months for consideration of allocation of spending and all these items that are being brought up. Leave as is, housing, transportation, arts and conference center. It's just a thought. But I guess what I'm feeling like is for the November 2022 election, I think it seems that given that it's May 3rd or 2nd, that we should focus on trying to keep it as simple as possible.
go ahead.
Question in a minute.
Go ahead, please.
No. And maybe you answered this already. The monies that have been collected in 2021, are they subject to the lodgers tax allocation retroactively? Or are we discussing here using that money for a different purpose, even though it's behind the fact that we collected it last year?
I think that I think that until you have a ballot question approved by the voters that changes the allocation, all of the monies collected under the lodger's tax is subject to the allocation in the 21 ballot language. Does that answer that question?
I think that's very clear, and I think that's very important, because everything we have been collecting is not going to be reallocated. It's
Unless we ask the.
Unless we ask the question,
That's
but
what
we
we're
can
talking
ask the
about.
question.
But the follow-up is, I think.
We can ask the question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the simple is, no, I mean, I think you could do that. I mean, again, because you're asking the voters to keep and expend, I think you could say, it's possible to say, and can we keep it and spend it for this purpose? I think that's possible. I do think it arguably clouds the issue of the voters deciding whether, a voter might say, I'm fine with keeping and spending the funds, but I don't want it to go to this particular purpose.
So,
But then I hope that answers the question.
Yeah.
It's just interesting because in a way, voters approved this allocation, we've collected the money. And then later we say, actually, we collected the money, we're not going to spend it in that sense. And I'm not saying for or against the whole allocation percentages, but that seems,
We asked them. We asked them.
I
the question
understand.
again.
I'm
So
just
it's
saying
not,
my
it's not that
perspective.
we're telling them how we're going to spend it. We might ask them again, do you want to do it differently now?
I think the issue is, in part, perhaps you had a sense of, we're going to collect X amount of money. And now we've exceeded that by up to 60%. So the question then might become, how much is appropriate rather than percentages? How much is appropriate to spend on different appropriate services? And so the question could be, I mean, I could envision if sales tax continues, you could get to the point where you're spending more on marketing the city of Durango than you're spending on your fire department. I mean, it's the potential there, given the revenue. So I guess the question is, what do we want to accomplish through the marketing? And to your point, Jessica, I think waiting a year for the second amount gives you some of that data.
Yeah.
But I also will say, Melissa, by giving them choices, we do get more information and we get more of a sense of what's the community sentiment around these dollars, because we certainly heard about it.
Definitely. And I'm all for giving them choices. I'm
Yeah.
just trying to decide if we do it
Now.
in 3 months.
Or-
Yeah.
And we have the time to engage the community to do that properly, because to me, that's an important part of that
Yeah.
process.
But this is choices on the 1-year overage.
So
That's what I'm asking is, are you supporting that? Or do you want to just,
$2021.
just choices on the overage
Oh,
for 2021?
I was just suggesting for 2021, since I feel like we don't have time,
Mhm.
just keep it as is, ask if we can retain and spend as the voters approve. And then we engage in a robust community-wide conversation to address it going forward, such that if the next 10 years, I think this is a 10-year lodger's tax. we
Actually, it
have-
has no sunset. This is
Oh, okay.
forever. That's,
Right,
it has
thank
to be
you.
remembered.
Anyway, into the future, at any amounts, we consider.
I like your
questions.
idea of focusing on 2021 overage only, but I do think that we should also ask the question, besides should we retain it and spend it as the ballot language? We
Just
should
to get
ask the
more
question,
information.
should we spend it on this instead? Because the dollars have come in for marketing that was anticipated. So marketing's been able to do their job because they got the money they thought they should get anyway. And so this is like a surprise to us, and it's like, is this a better way to spend the money? So I would support the idea of 2021 only in November, but I would like to ask 2 questions at least about how it gets spent.
But then if we're gonna ask the 2 questions, maybe, I just devil's advocate now thinking out loud, then maybe I see why you would just go ahead and ask it all.
But I think you're right about getting the information, and we don't know how much 2022 is. You know, we
No, we
don't.
don't know.
Yeah, and so
It may be break even, we don't know.
Mhm.
right, we have no idea. And that's kind of the cart before the horse
Right.
in some ways. Whereas this, we know exactly what it is. And we could make a case one way or the other for spending it as previously percentage or allocating it differently. And we could make a concrete case about it because we know exactly how much it is.
We would have to, if we were over for 2022, we would have to go back to the voters again.
Yes, in April.
With the same questions possibly.
Or maybe, well, obviously retaining it that question, but then the question may change because of what we learned or what we've heard.
In some ways, it's like being able to do an electoral survey.
And do you think we have time to figure out the second part of your question that you want to ask for the 2021 overages only?
Yes, I do.
Because that's what I'm concerned about.
Olivia, you were going to say something.
And I actually agree with Melissa on this. I think the easiest is to just make sure that the voters approve us keeping the money versus going through the refund route. And I agree with Jessica, as in, let's see how this marketing effort paid off, give it some time. And because we don't have enough time to get, what I also agree to is community engagement and feedback. So to do that, to put on the ballot in the next ballot language that allocates that money, we don't have time to do it.
Can I ask one other item before because you're going around and getting to, you have the option, there might be a third option. You've presented, keep it as it is for this information and then deal with the next year. And that's an option. You present two options for how it might be spent. The overage. And could you suggest in more general terms, a third option, which might be, here's two options that are pressing needs for the city. Or you can continue to market the city of Durango. You could give a third option, which will give you more information as to the sentiment for excessive use.
Just one more, as I'm sorry, I'm brainstorming.
No, that's why we're here. That's
Fourth option would be if we're just dealing with 2021 and we're just dealing with overage. Number one, can we retain it? What about also just spending it, not doing the community processes because we actually may not have time this year, and just putting it to something, let's just say, I'm just going to just say transportation as an example.
Right.
Yeah.
So
May we take the 600, and I thought it was
That's-
683,000,
Yeah.
and put it towards transportation?
Or workforce housing.
exactly.
Or what, yeah, and I guess that's the decision.
public
Council
safety.
in this case would have to come up with a loan for that overage. Anyway, but
Well, to your point, that's what I was going to suggest too, is that the amount of dollars that was going to go to marketing that the community agreed to
still
has
works.
still gone there. That was what they understood was going to go there. None of us anticipated this over collection. So we are fulfilling what the community thought we were going to fulfill, as well as what Visit Durango thought. And the other thing is, in instances like this, the reason why you have elected officials is to make decisions. And we have a much better idea of all the changes that have happened, of the housing, of the transportation that we need, of the urgent situation that we are really in. And we can make good decisions about that and then go forward for the future. But I believe that we have fulfilled our promise for 2021 on what Visit Durango was going to be receiving and what the community thought they were going to be receiving, as well as our other percentages. So now we have a different question. We have an overage, a surprise, an excellent surprise.
If I can add another perspective to that. If we make the somewhat rushed decision to allocate the funds during the next ballot, it seems extremely unlikely we have a project or projects that we are going to spend it on in that short time frame, where we do not already have money for in other funds.
Do we have to spend it right away or just get approval?
But
get
where
approval.
I'm going to is
Okay.
that approval or that allocation is not urgent, because we're not going to spend it anyway. So
Hmm.
we
I'm
can
gonna
buy-
differ with you.
A lot of
Can I finish?
assumptions.
I'm going to differ.
Can I?
Yeah, finish.
So in my opinion, it is maybe wise to allow us that time to get better knowledge of the people in our community and the success or not of the marketing with the current funds that were estimated and that they already have.
So
So-
you're suggesting overage should go to Visit Durango?
No, as is.
As is, just
As-
keep
as
it break as
reserve.
is.
No,
Okay.
keep it in reserve.
Keep it in the reserve.
Oh, keep it
until
in
we-
reserve.
Because that's what we're doing anyway.
No, we're not.
No.
We'll be allocated based upon the original percentages
The-
of
the
the
amount.
ballot.
It's only there because we can't spend it.
We can't
because
spend
we
it.
haven't got approval. As soon as we get
I'd
approval,
like to explain it. So I understand that currently the overages are in a specific fund because it's restricted, correct? We cannot spend.
It's in a specific account inside of the budget.
So that whole amount is being accumulated in a special account. And what we're speaking of here is in a relatively short notice, allocating that money to something, whatever it is. And we don't spend it, we don't have to spend it. We can,
Yes, it has to be distributed based upon the original ballot language. Once we receive approval to retain it, it would be distributed based upon the original ballot language. It would not stay in that fund.
Correct, Dirk?
I think that the allocation controls until we change it. I mean, I think what I hear you asking is that can we have a question that says we will retain the funds in excess of the $900,000 for 21, and we'll keep it in reserve until we make another decision about how to spend it. That's what you're saying.
that's the bottom line. Correct.
But that would have to be a separate question.
But then
like
we
another
don't make
question.
the decision on the allocation. We just leave it in the
Oh, you're saying
reserve.
leave it in the reserve
I
until
think that seems a
later
little bit
on.
questionable.
Yeah,
That
that's
seems
a-
more questionable to me than
So-
anything else.
Could
Okay,
I
I-
just,
Is that, we can- is that,
Because
my understanding that
either we
correctly?
make a decision and allocate it without enough community engagement or knowledge about the success of marketing, et cetera, and the other uses. Or we leave it, we do that homework, and the only question is, we want to keep it to spend. That would be the next ballot question, yes or no, or refund it. That would, that is the question anyway. Yeah, that's.
May I make a-
Interesting, because
So
what
that
should
would
be
be,
voting
the
on.
first question on that ballot would be, do we keep it or refund it? And if we keep it, the question would be, can we keep it in a reserve until during the next ballot, we make a better decision or suggestion to our community?
So-
based
I
on-
don't think that's a convincing.
may I also offer that we have an issue right now with accumulating funds with no purpose identified for them or use for them. So I don't want to continue, I would not want to continue that practice. I'd also like to say that I actually think between here and September or middle of August, we could identify projects that could be used. And I'm just giving you examples. The transit, we could shorten the wait time. That would have costs associated with it. We could work on partnering on transportation from hotels or something like that to cut down on traffic. We could look at, I would envision that between now and the middle, in the July meeting, we could have identified appropriate, compelling projects should this council go with it. So I'm concerned about a reserve fund with no identified purpose because of what we've seen in the past. And I am concerned that we have exceeded what we said we were going to collect. And I think that may cause some concern among the community that we're spending even excessively more than was expected. I'm going to try to say, I'm not certain we'll reach a decision today or not a decision or a consensus today, but we could try. Or we could look at always, if we can't reach something that we feel consensus around, we could look at a continuing discussion.
That was what I was going to recommend, if we could, if I may, that we have a further discussion about what could that additional ballot measure look like. Not excluding the idea that it would go into a reserve, but having that as one option to discuss, so that we were discussing, first of all, can we retain it? Second of all, do we retain it in a reserve awaiting whatever? Another one is, these are what we're going to discuss, right? Not what we're going to put on the ballot, but we're going to discuss these. Do we retain it and distribute it at the same level as the original ballot measure? Do we retain it and then expend it on transportation? And I really think we should have a robust, thorough discussion about this with maybe a study session totally dedicated to it.
Two things that I would like to add to that. I would like to know which Tabor questions he's gone through that have passed and how complex they are, how many options there are. Like, I feel like it's getting to be
We'll
almost
get it done.
too much.
I
So
can find that out.
I would like to know
We can make it
that.
happen.
What did you ask? So like when we go to election, like, what is his name? Sorry.
D. Weiser,
Thank
D.
you.
Weiser.
He's done many that have passed, all like successful ones. Have they been simple? Like, can we retain it and distribute it as the ballot language, period? Have they all been that way, or has there been some that have
They're
asked
complicated,
more
yeah.
complicated
Yeah,
things?
I'll tell you what my guess the answer is going to be. Most Tabor questions are, can we raise the sales tax by blank dollars? And there's no allocation, it just goes to the general fund. So your question was more, or shall the
Complex
property
to
tax be
begin with.
raised, or, so this, your lodger's tax with the allocations is it was a pretty complicated ballot question.
Mhm.
So
It was.
I think what you're doing is talking about adding another layer of complication by
Yeah.
saying we're gonna keep it, but also we're gonna change the allocations. I don't think there's any problem with doing that. And I can talk to him about the idea of how to structure a one-time change in the allocation, because that's what I'm hearing you say, is that,
Or just the $2021.
right, that one-time allocation of the $21.
The other concern I have about pushing it off to another study session, which I'm not disagreeing with, because I think I would like to talk about it more, but that's pushing off community engagement even more.
Right.
And so it's like getting it shorter and shorter if that's what our goal is to get community engagement, to try to figure out this question for November. If that's our goal, and we push this off to another study session. Does that make sense what I'm trying to say?
Yes, but I think
Poorly.
we're already too short.
No, I
Yeah.
know.
We-
I think the question is like what Kim is
Yeah,
saying.
I don't
which
think it's
is
community
we can
engagement.
Decide whether we're keep it as the same allocation or council's gonna decide.
Right.
Where it might go
And then
just for this one.
just for this, well, right, and then we'll have plenty of time to do it for future
Exactly.
overages,
Correct.
which I'm fine with as we
Which we need
see.
to do.
Yes.
So can I suggest that we have less than 5 minutes to be on schedule? And if there's support for it, let me ask the question, is there support for a continuation of this discussion? Outlining the different things that we've discussed and weighing at them, and with the commitment to providing direction at the next council study session, whatever, so that we can proceed. Is there support for that?
Yes.
Yes, definitely.
I support it, but I do think we can answer one question, which was the first one. Do we prepare the ballot numbers to keep that?
But we don't need that until August, and we can figure out what ballot language we actually want at the next study.
I think what Olivia is saying is right now, there is support to put this on the ballot in
That's right.
November. And then how it works is saying, I do have a question. If the city puts multiple issues on the ballot, like a different question on the ballot, do we pay for that individually, or is there a one-time cost for putting something on the ballot?
I think, I don't know the answer to that, but I think the share of our cost is we share the cost of the whole election with everyone who's on the ballot, right? So,
There is some additional cost for the printing of the ballot, the longer the question is,
but. it
because
would
we
be
send
a-
out
it would be an
13,000.
incrementally small, it would be double.
Yeah.
For example, if we have this question on the ballot and then we have to put another question coming on, is that question this much money? Or now are we not paying as much?
Are you
for
getting
that
2 for
other-
1?
Right, because you're getting
initiative
better,
that
yes,
could be
exactly.
going onto the ballot?
Right.
Are you getting-
The incrementals only the.
Are you-
Yes,
Yeah.
2 for the price of
Right,
1.
Exactly.
2 for the price
I
of
think
1.
what we'll do is check with the clerk's office. My guess is that there would be a small incremental increase, but it wouldn't be double.
If
Okay.
it pushes
Another
for,
another
yeah.
reason to have this discussion so that we know. that
Good to know.
So let's be real clear. We have direction that we will be proceeding with a ballot measure to address the over collection or the over anticipated collection from the proposed amount. And then that we will just have a study session that discusses the options for use of that over collection or not, and beginning to come with language. And our commitment is within this is to try to reach consensus on what that looks like because of the urgency of the time. Is
Well,
that,
we don't have to reach consensus at the next study session, because we still have, we could have another one if we needed to, but I just.
but in a
want-
time frame that allows,
Yes,
that's,
for
I guess
this-
I should have clarified, in a time frame that allows the city attorney to do his work. Perfect. Good.
And I also heard you say that you were leaning toward just asking for 21 and not including 22.
I believe we
That's
have,
what we're leaning.
do we have consensus on that?
Yeah, I
Or do you
Unless
want to
there's
wait?
something- Unless there's a reason that he comes forward that.
Why would, right, and the advantage is that it gives us time to
Exactly.
engage the community more
For
thoroughly for
22.
2022.
No, I was gonna say, why wouldn't we ask the first question if we can keep the money for both years? Because the printing is.
Why wouldn't we do that?
I think
Because we're gonna go through the allocation discussion anyway for April.
we don't know how much we're going to collect. And, we don't know how much we're going to collect. We don't know a couple of other things. And so we're asking for something of people where we don't have as as much information as we could have if you waited.
And I'm
Since
trying to
we're,
keep it simple, like
Right.
my thought is keep
but
it
since we're
as simple
talking,
as we can.
since we're talking about it again, and we don't have, we're not writing the ballot language within the next 2 weeks, like, can you just come with some pros and cons and then we'll like for
That's a
sure
good point.
decide?
I will,
Yeah.
I- what I will do is, I'll set up a phone call with Dee. I'll probably include Cynthia and Jose and myself and some of the folks to sort of bounce these ideas around, and then we'll be prepared to come back with some additional information. We can get some more information from the clerk.
Sounds great.
So yeah, the answer is yes. We'll gather some information and try to then reply with some ideas about how that might look. The
No, I'm gonna ask
simple-
for a
clearly, the
break. I'm gonna break a
simplest
break.
approach is
Give me
to
just a
just, the simplest approach is to ask for 21 and keep the allocation as is.
Okay.
So
Well, let's have that conversation at our next meeting.
And-
Thank you.
and If Dee wants to provide more feedback on that, then fine, but you can tell him that we're leaning towards.
I'll
Just-
tell them. Yeah. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you for so much. I'm going to give us a 5-minute break just for a moment and ask that council return at 3:50, please.
you.
5 minutes.
I don't. Oh, yeah, the one guy I think is Rachel Brown's visit Durango. She doesn't even have her, like, recognize her when she turned, I think. What's that? We've been busy.
And my 13-year-old son, like, made this noise that I asked him for earlier in the week. because he just bugs the crap out of me. And I took it off running to get it to like attack him. To a bar. Oh my blood all over the playground. Oh my god! You can't see the bruising until the makeup. I like a deep bruise up here, and there was like this netting. There was this netting on the bar, and so like sliced my skin off.
What is that? What happened to you?
I was playing on the playground on Friday with all the boys,
Oh.
and my 13-year-old son was being annoying, so I like took off to like tackle him, and I like so hard.
Oh.
Broke my nose. There was blood.
You broke
everywhere.
it?
Like, so it was like black. I had black eyes. And I'm like, sorry. There was
Oh.
like blood all over the playground.
Oh.
There was like a canvas around it, and so it just scraped my nose and all the skin.
Oh, that's what happened.
Oh my god.
I thought maybe you got hit with the sunglasses on and it, you know.
It was busted my face on a beam, and I like
So
literally
to
took
your
off
point, we will work it out.
And you think
Thank
okay,
you.
yeah, we'll make it.
What we'll
Oh
do.
my god.
I'm so worried, but you know,
They're so
this meeting's,
Yeah, we'll work it out and, you know, and it's not,
yeah,
we'll work it out.
we'll figure it out. It may have to be, I don't know, I just don't. We'll see. You're right, there's nothing. We're doing the right thing by doing what we're doing.
Okay,
Oh, I was really enjoying the break.
I'm calling us back to order. Thank you.
Are we back here now? Okay.
Let
Are
it,
you
so-
gonna be here for the next hour?
no,
No, we'll,
You are, I'm gonna move.
no, we'll do a quick presentation just to kind of recap what was in your packet. And then we can belly up to the table.
okay, so, and let me also say that, city manager and Faye, I'd like to going forward, maybe we could work in a 5-minute break into the study sessions, just to include
That might be the
that.
best thing you do.
There we
I
go.
hope not. I hope there's something that gets done.
Me
That's
too.
a 5-minute break. That's a brilliant idea.
So,
Eloquent.
and elegant.
I might like it.
We have 45 minutes, we have an hour, possibly 55 minutes depending, but I want to give the full hour to this discussion, so we may be going over 5 minutes. Tori, we've got the materials. I know you have some things you want to discuss. I do want to allow for questions throughout. And so rather than sitting with a presentation for you to address that, but our topic is the Mason Center.
Yes.
So
And we can take questions throughout. So we do have a brief slide that we wanted to get through. With me presenting is also Eva Hansen, as you know, our housing manager, and then Vicky Vandegrift with
Right,
community
perfect.
development. So I'm going to go through some slides and then hand it over to them to talk about some housing options. So, but before we get to that point, are there any questions generally or anything like that? So.
why don't you get started, and I will be looking around the table. If you have something in it, you don't want to just jump out. If you just kind of like raise your finger or something like that, I'll make certain that we get you.
Trey, I want you to, I'm just gonna look up here.
You're going to ignore me.
I
I won't take it personally.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll go ahead and get started then. Just real quickly, like I said, we put quite a bit of information in your council packet, which I'm going to try and quickly just summarize and get through relatively quickly. But again, ask any questions as we go slide by slide. Just some quick history and current use. The property that we're talking about, the Mason Center, it's about 2.06 acres. It was purchased from the school district in 1995 for $500,000.
Did that include the original building that was on it?
Yes, it did include the building. It had been used since that time until about 2020 for parks and recreation activities, namely our gymnastics program and our game time program. We also did use it for storage as well. The school was removed with the exception of the existing gym in 2021-22 for about $430,000. The disturbed area was remediated. Turf grass was put in, trees, etc. And as I mentioned, it's about 3,500 square feet, 4,000 square feet of gymnasium space that remained. Currently, there's power hooked up to it, but there are no other utilities such as water, sewer, et cetera. So it's just kind of an existing facility, very cold in the winter. The site is also zoned as public right now. We did do, when the question is asked, we wanted to make sure we did an inventory of the trees. Our arborist went out there. There are 92 trees on the site. There are 23 varieties. And just for clarification, the tree inventory does include some right-of-ways and medians and the like. So a good, healthy urban forest on the site. As we were looking at this, we did review some planning documents. The one of note was the Parks, Recreation, Open Space, Trails, and Recreation Master Plan. It did cover, there was a section that covered the Mason Center site, but in general, the Mason Center is considered a neighborhood park. And when we started looking at against our inventory and our level of service, we're pretty much right in line with where we're wanting to be at for level of service for neighborhood parks. We have 71.25 acres is what we would strive to be at with a population of about 19,000 people. And we're at 72.37 acres of neighborhood parkland. Just a note, Buckley Park, which is about 2-3 blocks to the west, is also considered a neighborhood park. But I will say that just the use of that park, Buckley Park, there could be an argument that it is a specialty park and not necessarily a neighborhood park, as it hosts many events and is also in a commercial area. So the poster master plan also does go on to elaborate and talk about the Mason Center site. And it does say the best course of action may be to demolish the building and expand the park. So that was what was more or less done, with the exception of the gymnasium, which was retained for storage for supplies and equipment.
Tori?
Yes.
I do just want to point out that that plan solely looked at it from a perspective of Parks and Rec. It didn't look at it from a larger citywide need and use of services.
Yeah.
It wasn't a comprehensive asset management analysis.
That is true.
Thank you.
Yes. And it's pretty much been my understanding that the intent of the gymnasium center was more or less a temporary use for storage of supplies and equipment until we could find additional indoor recreation storage space, whether it's through the development of a new facility somewhere else in the community or something like that. So I don't think it was anyone's intention in Parks and Recreation that this would be a 5, 10, 15, 20-year site for storage. With that, we did, staff did kind of take a look at what we would need to do if we did have to, exit the site with our supplies and equipment. Right now, we're currently storing equipment and supplies for special events in sports and athletics. Looking at the inventory in there, we'd probably need about 25 to 3,000 square feet. The floor is pretty much completely used for storage in that site. We reached out to a local realtor who gave us a square foot of rental space in the Bodo area of about $2 per square foot. So we'd be looking at about $5,000 to $6,000 a month if we tried to rent space to store our equipment. We also looked at some city-owned lands where we could look into storage areas, namely Greenmount Cemetery. There's some space up front. There's also some space in the back area that we could potentially use. And then we also looked at our city operations facility. All those options on city-owned lands, we'd either need to renovate some space or repurpose the space or build new for that. So just wanted to put that out there and keep that in your mind. So when we started looking at this, we looked at really kind of three options. The first two options I'm going to present, which are Parkland Opportunities, and then also recreational opportunities for the site. And then I'll turn it over to talk about housing opportunities. The first one, we did have some illustrations kind of created to give everyone an idea of what could happen out there. For Parkland Opportunities, the illustration provides kind of an overview of if we expanded, just take out the building and expanded the parkland, we could potentially expand the playground, which is what's illustrated here. Other options would be to add additional turf, which would probably be the least expensive option. We could add restrooms, shade structure, and another option that came up was to expand the arboretum since we have a pretty healthy urban forest there right now. So those are some of the parkland opportunities that we looked at.
One that's missing is a dog park, a neighborhood dog park.
That we could put that on the list too.
As a dog park is a pretty high priority in the Parks and Rec department, as far as it's even considered for Durango Mesa Park, which means you have to drive to it. It's not a neighborhood park, and we have one in our entire community. So I think it should be at least evaluated as a possibility. And it doesn't have to be the entire thing by any means. It could just be a component.
We could add that as part of an evaluation. If we get some direction on how council would like us to proceed, we could add that to the list. If you decide we want to go with parkland opportunities or recreation opportunities, we could do further evaluation, do more community input and things like that. Recreational opportunities, we really looked at this in two ways. The first way was if we renovated the facility, how would that impact our current parks and recreation programming opportunities? And the one thing that came to mind was returning game time back to that site. We could probably host an additional 100 participants in game time if we use that site plus the other two sites that we're using. And then other things like indoor basketball, volleyball, fitness classes, and the opportunity for pickleball. The other opportunity would be to partner with another community organization. Two organizations have reached out to us, Durango Creative District, the Gem and Mineral Club. Once it started bubbling up that we were talking about this, they reached out to us. So those are opportunities with community organizations to partner with. I will also say the Boulevard Neighborhood Association has reached out to me recently to talk about their desire to partner as well, whether it's expanded parkland or things like that. They were interested in partnering, potentially even financially. So I wanted to throw that out there as well. In your packet, you have a document from FCI Constructors talking about some of the costs to renovate the current site, to add an addition onto the facility, and then to do some site improvements. In those costs, I'll just let you know that the addition, they estimated it at about 4,400 square feet. What we have represented here is about 600 square feet. So I think that it was about $2.8 million to add an addition of 4,400 square feet. We would definitely be looking at that to potentially reduce the size depending on what our programmatic needs are in that area for that space. Renovation costs just for the facility alone was about $1.6 million that's the existing facility, and then about another $1.6 million to reconnect sewer, do additional site improvements and things like that. So those costs are provided in your packet as well. And now we're going to move on to some housing opportunities, which I will turn over to Eva.
Good afternoon. What's provided in the staff report, as well as the quick slide presentations that we'll be presenting to you guys this afternoon, hasn't changed much from what I talked about in April, but really wanted to enhance some of the conversation that we had with some of those illustrations. So one of the things, of course, moving forward with the housing option at this site would require, or likely require, the removal of the remaining gymnasium. As Ture mentioned, this is currently zoned public. In the public zone, the only residential use would be allowed is per a conditional use permit, which would be age-restricted housing and senior congregate care housing. The historic designation parcel also falls in the historic overlay district and would be subject to stricter development guidelines. To develop most of the types of housing that we would be looking at, a comprehensive plan amendment would be required. And that process would require neighborhood meetings, public hearings before Planning Commission, as well as City Council. If other types of housing are desired, the property would need to be rezoned after the comprehensive plan amendment. And the rezoning process requires public hearings again before Planning Commission and City Council, as well as an ordinance. Zoning requested would be based upon a proposed development. I just clicked. Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Mr. Sherwood. So the first illustration here that we have for housing primarily was around the idea of the EN1 zone that's already around the park existing currently. The preliminary concept to illustrate would be a number and types of units that could be allowed. In this illustration, I think we looked at about 3 single-family lots and 4 duplex lots, so approximately 7 developable parcels there. Challenges, of course, include hillside topography and engineering complexities. We haven't dove into that much. We just know that those would probably exist, but haven't looked at costs for any of that yet. Loss of trees and park space, and without density here, would be challenging to make this more affordable without some sort of subsidies with that component. The other option we wanted to look at, and some of the feedback that we got during the April study session was, well, could potentially there. So this illustration shows if that were to occur, it would primarily have to be rezoned to ENMF. I think here we look at about, again, 7 2-story multifamily dwelling units on the right-hand corner there where there's less topography challenges, but those still might exist. The building must be sprinklered, so another cost there. Some engineering complexities, again, loss of trees and park space, and without density may not be affordable without some sense of subsidy component to that, as well as, again, removing the existing gym that's already there and having to relocate for the storage stuff for recreation.
Does the existing gym have to be relocated?
We're not quite sure yet. I don't know if we dove into that analysis, but through
It looks like the footprint shows.
the
us.
footprint shows it though, I believe. Do you remember if Lee?
Sorry.
Do you remember if Lee actually specifically analyzed that we thought it had to be removed for that design?
No.
Okay. And that's all we have for the housing.
May I, those are your 2 options?
For housing, yes.
For housing, yes.
And then you had the option for,
Parkland and recreation.
may I ask council to consider a 3rd option? And I'm going to ask Dirk to weigh in on this. Last week, we heard from 9R that they have no plan for where to put the big picture school. This was school property. And could we, and we're in negotiations with 9R about significant resources to have the right to own Buckley. Would it be feasible to consider this as a potential, returning to its original use or some side of here as a potential school? And I'm asking that of the city attorney.
I know of no legal reason that would prevent you from using it for that purpose.
So PB includes schools. Special use permit would work.
And it may not be something we decide today, but as we think about the negotiations for Buckley and we think about our assets and our growing needs, would this be, what would this look like if it were to be considered?
I like the idea because I've actually thought about that too. That's why I asked about what was there when we bought it. Because, you know, and then they could make a choice about whether or not they want to put teacher housing there and house the big picture. I mean, they could do a lot with that or make it a big park and do whatever they want to with it, but that's an interesting idea.
I would like to suggest I would like to see the presentation first and then we can discuss.
This is a,
Is there normal?
no,
Oh, okay. I thought you were going on park space.
And I do remind everyone that the district superintendent did throw out a number. So it's now a public number of it's still in the negotiation of 3.7 million for the purchase of Buckley Park.
Well, given the silence, maybe I shall start. Is that okay?
Yeah, please.
No, let me just read my notes here. I think I'm a big believer in green space, park space. As soon as the park is developed, it's gone. Very unlikely to come back. This park space is one of the few, or actually the only one, I think, east of 3rd and south of 15th and north of College. It is extremely well used. so I've heard before that people say, well, there wasn't building before. But when the decision was made to destroy or demolish the building and increase the park space, it is my understanding that there was no condition that that would be temporarily and we're going to rebuild something. So at this point, and if I'm incorrect, but I don't think there was a motion or an appropriation that was passed at the time with that condition.
There was a discussion that we, as a
Discussion.
council, as a council, because I was on there, that as a council, we will look at the highest and best use for that property, but for the temporary, we need to address the current situation. So I want to clarify that.
So maybe as a first thing, I would maybe pull the notes of that meeting or what exactly was the motion or the appropriation for the demolishing of that building and how that was worded.
doesn't
Regardless of that, we're looking at park space here and we spent what, $430,000 on the demolition and installing grass and turf. If we do anything with that site, that would be maybe unnecessarily spent taxpayer money. So I would like to see this park space as it currently is maintained as park space and send a very clear message to our community that we value green space everywhere throughout our city and stand behind it, maybe even making it more formal so we do not have future discussions and associated division in our community when we're looking at another park somewhere else and the whole discussion rises again. Yeah, so I think that would be, it's maybe not as listed as clearly, but I would keep it.
So
as
you would
park and
spend,
green.
I do want to clarify, you would spend $3.7 million of the city's resources to purchase Buckley Park.
And we're speaking of Mason Center,
No, I mean, this is an opportunity to save 3.7 million.
but we're speaking of the Mason Center. I would
And I'm
like to
speaking of the
focus-
Mason, at the Mason Center, you could propose a swap with the 9R, saving the city $3.7 million in cash or assets to do a swap. So you're opposed to looking at $3.7 million savings for the city in this case.
I
Just, can we be just a little careful on the negotiation side of it? It's
Yeah.
an executive session, and I don't want to get to the
Right,
point where everything has to be open in
Right.
regards to those
Well, then maybe
negotiations.
the question is, are you opposed to looking at any other options? Are you opposed to doing any other research and any other discussion about other options?
maybe I'll make it very clear. I
Are you
think
opposed?
this should be green space and park space. And I think given the fact that the council discusses this, I would suggest, I would like to see council make a more formal approach to maintaining all park space and green space throughout our community, unless it's a very extreme situation. So I'm pretty clear, I think, in that I say I would like to see this park kept the way it is now with the amount of green space and park space.
So no discussion about having it be improved or enhanced, or that the gymnasium might be used
That was
for
my
something
position.
else? So no discussion of using the gymnasium for something else or enhancing the park and making it better?
This is my first part of it.
I'm just
and-
asking you
and
a
let's-
question.
That's
And
good. Okay,
let's-
I'm gonna
let's
jump in
move it
real
on.
quick and give my opinion. Okay, so especially after seeing the presentation, I think that I'm more set on either part. I love the park ideas, both of them with the Mason or not the Masons. Game time and potentially gymnastics going back in there. My kids went to game time there a long time ago, and or making the park even bigger and tearing down the gymnasium. I would like to see those two options kind of more hashed out a little bit more. The housing, like Eva said, the density probably wouldn't be there for any affordable housing unless it's, and then as I was driving around, I drove down Holly yesterday as I was thinking about this after reading the agenda and stuff. And I drove down Holly and there's that piece of land that's right there. And it's like that makes sense for housing. For me, driving past the Mason Center doesn't make sense for housing. I too agree. I want to keep that green space, open space. I would like to see what happens in executive session before I say that I want to get rid of the Mason Center Park to 9R to and see, you know, like I just.
But you're not opposed to
I'm not
considering
opposed
another
to
option.
No, of course not. I would like, I always want to get information, but I do agree with either, I want, and pickleball, potentially courts, indoor pickleball courts there, like we could solve so many things with more park uses for Mason Center.
Okay.
So that's where my main focus is going to go.
But I appreciate the clarification that you're not opposed to looking at a brand new option that hadn't been on
That
the
makes
table
sense.
prior to this. And I apologize for it just came to me as we've been seeing the meeting the week before. Melissa.
First of all, I want to, I think, first commend staff on a really great agenda doc and presentation. It was just very well laid out with the history and the information that you provided, all the documentation. So thank you so much. That really was very helpful for me. I was thinking I was going to need to go do some research, and it was all right there. So thank you for that. My thought is that number one, first and foremost, really important for me in this discussion today, I think, is my desire and my hope that we will remove housing from the discussion of the Mason Center Park going forward. I'd like to take that off the table completely. I think it's causing a lot of unrest in our community and division and divide. And for me, it's not worth removing the only park in the neighborhood for housing that provides such low yield. Like Jessica's saying, there's other areas I'd like to see us focus housing on. Also, like in the housing report that the staff provided for us on Rita Road and the library. I'd like to focus on those. And I agree with what Councilor Bosmus was saying about, is there anything we can do to officially designate this as parkland going forward? So some of these discussions can not come up again. I appreciated option 2, looking at additional parks and recreation programming opportunities. I was really concerned about the costs. Those costs seemed very excessive, but not excessive, but very expensive. If I added up what was in the agenda doc, I think it was $5.8 million. You mentioned in that doc that it was perhaps on the high end, but even if we cut it in half, clearly that would have to go into the CIP budget for prioritization through Parks and Rec and through the entire process. We'd have to have community process around that. So it makes me lean towards the option of expanding it as parkland and keeping it as parkland. And I think that's where I'm leaning. I see this as the most economical option. I see this as preserving the investment that we already made, like you suggested, Councilor Bosman's, with our 2005 funds. Also recognizing it's not just an amenity to the neighbors, but also the entire community, as was laid out in the agenda doc. And importantly for me, I'm seeing this is a really small neighborhood. I see it as very congested already. Parking's an issue. And I think that all of that is weighing into my mind of wanting this just expanded parkland. And I also see that this is a historic area and a historic district that has just a huge amount of charm and character. It really adds a lot to our community, and I want to preserve that. And I believe that the best way to do that is by expanding the parkland and possibly making it even a better community asset for the community, maybe improving upon the gymnasium, or I'm not even sure what I'm trying to say, but the equipment there to make it, even a better park for the community. But that would be what I want to do is kind of improving on the parkland as is. And lastly, I just really feel like this option that I'm leaning towards help us maintain also and preserve our quality of life. And I recognize that strong importance to balance the competing priorities that we are all facing in our strategic plan. Housing extremely important, but also maintaining our quality of life. And as we get to denser and denser living within the city, those green spaces are going to become more and more important. So that's what I'm hoping we might.
Melissa, I just want to clarify. I heard you say take housing off the agenda, and I thought I heard at the beginning, but I want to clarify. Do you support at least looking at this new option as a potential, and what might be involved with that within a partnership with 9R?
It's interesting that you bring that up. I would need more time to think about that, honestly, because that.
So you're not ruling it,
wasn't-
but you're not ruling it out.
I'm not, but I have concerns with it already. And the biggest one is time. I heard from 9R that they're looking to move immediately, that they need to get a place for their children immediately. that current building, I don't think is gonna satisfy but I wouldn't be happy to see
Yeah.
children going in that environment to learn at this point. I think it needs to be, would need to be reconfigured. We would need to
Yeah.
deal with parking. We would need to be dealing with a lot of issues, and I'm not sure we can do that by, I believe, September.
I think there's some other options and other opportunities at play with 9R. So my biggest question is trying to get clarification on at least exploring the option of, since it is a legal use for this property, what would be the pros and cons of that? When we haven't had that discussion tonight, because I recognize I just brought it to you.
Right, and so I'm never totally opposed to having discussions, but where I'm leaning right now for this particular space, given what I just laid out, where it's located, congestion, traffic, parking, I feel like for that location, what I'm probably going to be arriving at, as our community has developed over time since that was a school, is that this is this location is best used for expanded park for the entire community.
Let me go to
Just one other thought I had as you made me think about that is that I really appreciated what staff laid out in the agenda doc about the ratio of preserving our land for quality of life. I forget. Parkland. And by maintaining that, it keeps us at the ratios that we had desired in our 2019 post plan. So anyway, I thought that was interesting as well.
Great, Kim.
Thank you.
And then I'll end up with my
Yeah.
thoughts.
So there's a couple of things for me here. I agree that the density on that piece of property is minimal. So I think density is the best way if we're going to do infill to solve our housing issue. I'm concerned, as Mayor Pro Tem Youssef is, about the costs of renovating the building and doing programs there. So I would like to look at it from maybe a different point of view than you perceived it, but as a public-private partnership. So in the same kind of sense as we use Lake Nighthorse with public-private partnerships, we have private enterprises out there renting out equipment to use on Lake Nighthorse, et cetera, and so forth. Is there a use, whether I don't go anywhere from one end of the scale, a daycare center, to the other end of the scale of a restaurant? I mean, I don't know, I'm just kind of like out there. Or a game time like event. So the city isn't bearing the cost of that, because it would be an income producing situation for a private enterprise. And that way, those millions of dollars could go toward other amenities that the city wants to do. So I would hate for us to not explore a public-private partnership for that building. I'm not completely convinced that taking it down isn't the right answer, but I think we need to explore the public-private partnership. And, you know, I live a block away from that park, and I do see what goes on there, and I see how it's used. And in its current state, it really doesn't provide the park amenities that could be provided there. There's so much that could be done to enhance that. And like I suggested, you know, a quarter of it could be a dog park. Another quarter of it could be a really cool kids environment. Another part of it could be like the flat part, a bocce ball court for seniors with lots of seating. There is no seating there right now. So you go to that park and you sit on the wet, dirty ground. And so I really think that if we're going to keep it as a park, we have to talk about how do we enhance it in an economical way that benefits our community. So I'm not opposed to that conversation by any means. And as far as the 9R school district situation is concerned, it's an interesting idea. I think we have other options. So I would like to look at all the options that might be applicable to the Buckley Park exchange.
So does that rule out, I mean, we're not making any decisions, we're not doing anything, it's just, does that all options include looking at this as at 9R as a possible partner on this spot? Or,
Well, so I think we should look at all options for exchange or
Okay,
payment
I see.
or
I appreciate that.
acquiring, whether we exchange anything or not, or whether we pay them anything or not,
Wait,
acquiring
sure.
Buckley Park.
Which may or may not include Mason. You're looking at all options.
I'm willing to look at all because we
Okay.
actually have not, we've kind of had one conversation, but we haven't expanded that. And I think that there's some really good other options available.
Okay, so let me give my opinion. So we have it. I think we've got a sense going around, but I want to then reach that consensus and by actually going around. First of all, thank you to staff. And I actually think we did our job here as councils. Our job is to evaluate our assets, right? We have an opportunity and we had to, critical thinking is what can we do with this? What are the possibilities? So I too appreciate, Eva, the work you put into it, but because I think it was important and necessary to look at it. But when you think about it, I see the limitations there. I also believe, though, that we have a opportunity to possibly partner, or at least bring it to a consideration as we think about this asset and some other issues that we're trying to acquire. I raised the dollar amount, which was a public figure, because I'm forever looking at the city's assets and what's the appropriate use. I don't have an opinion here, but I'm wanting to get more information. I would like to, because it is so new, without going into negotiations there, I would at least like the option to have a better understanding of how this might be used, if this is of interest, if there's any possibility of making this work, either the gymnasium or otherwise. Because I also know that, I don't know, but there may be other possibilities for 9R in the short term that we're not aware of. So if I heard this correctly, and please correct me if don't quite have it, I get a sense that Jessica, Kim, and I'm still there, Melissa, you're interested in more information, but you did kind of make your leaning. I get a sense that there's at least 3, possibly 4 support for not looking for removing, this is 4 consensus, 3 or 4, removing housing and looking at it from a possibility of a partnership, what that might look like with 9R, as well as the parking. Do I have a park, excuse me?
Not parking, park.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, I don't want to speak for people, but I want to make certain.
I
I've
want
got that.
housing off the table. I want
Thank
to
you.
really pursue the park, better park, like, I want it to be a better park than it is. And park options, I'd like to game time numbers. Are we over capacity at those 2 locations we have at the Mason Center or at the Rec Center and Chapman Hill? Is there a wait list? Like what are those? I'd like to know stuff about that, and options as a better park, whatever that looks like. And then I will, especially after today's executive session, I feel like maybe be able to make a better decision about if I want more information on a partnership, or, I'm not.
Sure.
I would agree. I think that's well said.
Okay.
I'm very concerned about you adding that into this discussion here now, in that maybe what you're suggesting what I don't want it to do is all of a sudden become a study session or something where we're talking about a partnership. I see it as more inclusive in our executive sessions and discussions that staff is undertaking with them. I don't see that as part of this
Yeah.
agenda doc. So I'm concerned about you adding it in.
Yeah, and I added it in because it is a legitimate use for this space to return it in. So I wanted to get that. And so, and it's a study session.
Bring up
and that's
whatever we
good.
want to.
So it's all related to Mason Center and the use of it. So I
But it
know.
wasn't in the agenda doc, or, honestly,
You haven't thought
I hadn't thought about it at all until you just brought it up.
Yeah, because
But-
it was like,
And I don't know if even staff did. And so I think that I'm concerned about the ad and what that means for our future work together, because what I evaluated in this agenda doc was the 3 options that were presented, and to reiterate, I don't need to reiterate, but I like
Right.
the extended parkland. And
But-
I would be willing
but
to look at.
I think to your
use-
guys' point, the
yeah.
executive session might give us direction
Yeah.
on this
Yep,
conversation.
yep.
but I would want to say that with all counselors, I think if it's legitimately on the agenda, as Mason Center was, there needs to be some room for creative on the spur of the moment thinking. So we don't want to stymie that either. I appreciate that, but you don't want to stymie creative on the spur of the moment. Oh, I just thought about this and shall we add it? So I think it's a balance, but the point being, as long as it's on the agenda and it's related to it, I wholly.
And it totally was, so you're absolutely
Totally
correct
agree.
in that. But I
Yeah.
do think it's better discussed in the executive session.
Absolutely. Kim, I'm trying to get a sense. I think I heard you say you're willing for all option or explore all options as they relate to the 9R.
And Buckley, but that's not this conversation.
Okay.
This conversation is about the Mason Center, as far as I'm concerned. And so our conversation about 9R and possible exchanges comes during a conversation about 9R and possible
Okay.
exchanges. That's the buckets I would like to work with.
And Olivia, you made, repeated your point at the beginning, so I think I'm pretty clear that you want an open space, it maintained as an open space, and even going further and looking at something more of a resolution or something to that effect about prioritizing open space within the council.
I think if we can agree to take the housing option off, then we already made success. And everything else on designing the park or improving the park would be the next level.
I think there was definitely 3, maybe 4 for that. Sure. Expanding the park and or looking at options on expanding parkland.
Understanding that when we look at other housing things
Things
and
might
density, we need to talk about where do we put people? Because one of the wonderful things about the Mason Center is like Tamarind Square, it's downtown. And so seniors, disabled, and other people can walk into town, walk to work, do those kind of things. So that's one of the things I look at when I look at housing is equity and the sense of, do we put them out on the far expanses where they have to get on transportation that we don't really have adequate transportation for right now? Do they have to drive their car? So I'm looking at all those kind of issues too, not just wanting more housing, but where should it be to be fair to everyone, that kind of thing. So that's where my preference for Mason Center was coming from, had to do with the capability of people getting into town and doing it efficiently and effectively, you know, and not having to spend $3 million for a home to do it. So that's where my position was coming.
And I like that you even said that, like, this is a time for us to ask questions and be curious and, you know, like bring things up as a study session. And just because I say like, yeah, I support finding out if this is the highest and best use, doesn't mean I'm against all parks. And so I think that you know, the public and hopefully we can respect each other and say like, we did our due diligence. We saw that this didn't make sense. We support housing, we support open space. We can support those things and ask questions without being
Robust conversations lead to the best decisions. And if you don't have robust conversations, you don't make the best decisions, I don't believe so.
And I would say this was a robust conversation.
Yeah.
And
Do
it
we,
has been.
the agenda has us ending, I do believe, where's my
4:45.
glasses? Yes, and it's not like we're opening it up for anything else. So I just want to make certain we've covered anything.
Yeah, any comments from
We're good.
staff?
No questions?
Okay.
Okay, then we will end at 4:32 PM and we will reconvene at 5:30.
Good job, Mayor.
Great.
Woo-hoo.
Okay.
You're setting a precedent now.
Great. Okay. That's nice.
So if you want to,
Yeah. I just-
see you later.
On the phone.
If I,
Yeah, go ahead.
if you want to take a look at the voting sheet, you two, because
Yes.
we'll
I
have.
think I already know what I want. It wasn't that hard. It's not
I know, I agree with you. I think
Okay.
we already discussed it.
Yeah.
But I want to familiarize myself with
Yeah.
exactly what names go where.